So just to quickly introduce myself, Adam Hawksbee, as Alex says, I'm head of policy at the West Midlands Combined Authority, and have been working for the last 6 months or so on our digital roadmap, on pulling together some of the activity happening across the region on digital, and particularly giving some coherence to the work that the Combined Authority are doing in a number of different spaces. And what we've been able to do is, instead of just having a fairly narrow document that focuses just on areas where the Combined Authority might have delivery responsibilities, we've pulled together a coalition of stakeholders across local authorities, LEPs, universities, further education colleges, the private sector, and others, third sector particularly, in order to have an agreed direction in the roadmap. And I'll talk briefly about the context that we found in our evidence base for the roadmap, outline the 5 missions, but then really leave it open for some discussion and feedback, because this is meant to be the opening of a conversation and a collaborative effort as opposed to a final product. So the context for the document recognised the real strengths on digital in the region. So the progress that West Mids 5G have enabled on 5G connectivity. We've now got double the connectivity, or double the coverage of the next highest Combined Authority area or highest region. Some of the real excellence we've got in our economy. So we've got 3 high potential opportunity areas identified by the Department for International Trade around digital and tech in connected and autonomous vehicles, gaming, and data-driven health and life sciences. We've got some real excellence in the public sector, Transport for West Mids Police, parts of the NHS recognised as real exemplars in digital public service transformation, and things like the Digital Skills Partnership in order to try and meet our digital skills gap. So lots of good work already happening in some of these spaces. But I think it's widely acknowledged there are still some real challenges. So the digital divide is one that's been particularly clear and has been highlighted really by experiences during COVID. Too many families that do not have devices, do not have access, do not have the essential digital skills required to participate fully in society and in our economy. In terms of our digital and tech economy, we've got really limited equity investment, and have seen that actually decrease, while in other areas it's increased over the past year. So really have to do a lot to ensure that we're not losing digital and tech scale-ups to other areas. And in terms of our broader economy, a big chunk of our productivity gap is driven by low adoption of basic digital technologies in both our foundational economy and in our big tradable sectors like manufacturing. And our skills gap remains in terms of what employers are looking for and are available in the labour market. Our skills gap remains the largest in the UK, and on digital skills is stubbornly the largest still in the UK. So some real challenges that will, I imagine, be very familiar to many of you in this group, and are ones that you'll have discussed in previous sessions. So to tackle those, or to try and make progress on those as a collaborative group, we've identified 5 missions, and in the roadmap, which I believe was shared in advance of this meeting, but I'll make sure I share in the chat as well, which we published last Thursday at VentureFest. In the roadmap, we identify these 5 missions, a set of outcomes that we want to use to measure whether we're making progress on these missions, and then a set of regional activity, either that is already happening, that is going to continue to happen over the next few years, or that we've planned, that we've submitted investment proposals for against those missions. So all of that detail is in the roadmap, and I'm really keen to use this forum and to work with kind of Ian, Alex, Sarah, to make sure that this group hold us accountable for making progress on some of these things, and indeed work with us on some of the actions. So the 5 missions are 1 around access. So really that's all about bridging that digital divide, and within access we include both work on digital inclusion, so right at how you get onto the first rung of the ladder in the skills system. So have people got devices? Have they got affordable data packages? Have they got connectivity in their area? So all of that work, and we're actually partnering with the Good Things Foundation, the National Digital Social Inclusion Charity. They've seconded one of their senior team into the Combined Authority to help establish a regional coalition for digital inclusion. And I know a number of you joined the first meeting of that we had a couple of weeks ago, and that coalition is we're looking for broad membership across all sectors. So if digital inclusion is an agenda that particularly interests you, then that would be a really good point of engagement. The other part of that access mission is digital skills. So we've worked really closely with the Digital Skills Partnership. So we're one of, I think, 8 or 9 in the UK that seeks to bring together the private, public, third sectors, employers and skills providers, a range of actors, to ensure that we're bridging digital skills gaps at all levels. And there we've got a range of actions around digital boot camps, around essential digital skills, and around working with employers to identify particular areas where there are digital skills gaps. So mission 1 around access. Mission 2 is then around data, and that's both how we more effectively share data across the region between different partners, and how we then analyze and use that data in making decisions to solve public problems. So in terms of data sharing, there are some real pockets of excellent practice within the region. So I think in the chat, someone's mentioned public health and health. We've worked particularly with the Pioneer project within the NHS, run by Elizabeth Sapir and her team, to try and learn from the progress they've been able to make in healthcare data and apply that to parts of local government and the public sector. One of the proposals we've got in the roadmap, and something we're working on, is establishing a West Midlands data store to learn from and look like the work in London on the London data store that they're now on their, I think, 3rd version of. So a lot of learning about how you best share data, in particular across local government where it's a bit of a challenge, but then also plugging into police, NHS, and parts of the private sector that have really excellent data that we could use. And then around analytic capacity with data, that's working with organisations like West Midlands Ready, the coalition that's hosted at the University of Birmingham, to build our shared analytic capacity, learning from things like the London Office of Technology and Information, where they've really moved this forward. And I'll try, and I'm kind of spotting questions coming up in the chat as we've gone along. So just because they're on the first 2 missions, so Pam, I'm aware of the work that Cass is doing because he's plugged into indirectly the Digital Skills Partnership. And in fact, we're looking to possibly invite some community interest companies along to the next meeting of the Digital Inclusion Coalition to talk about the work they're doing, particularly with schools and on IT refurbishment. And Devon, yes, we're linked into the Open Data Forum. So we met with Pauline and Chris before we published a roadmap to incorporate their feedback. And we're talking to them at the moment, both on digital inclusion and on the establishment of the West Midlands data store. So we're linked into them and making sure they're fully involved. So that's missions 1 and 2. Mission 3 is around infrastructure. So obviously within the region, we've got real advantages on 5G, as I mentioned, but we are struggling on fibre and on 4G connectivity. And actually, even though we've got an advantage on 5G, it's going to really require keeping our foot on the pedal to maintain that advantage and that leadership. So what we've talked about there is a range of options and a range of opportunities leveraging 5G's work on infrastructure acceleration. Vicky, yes, it is captured somewhere. All of this is just stuff that's in the roadmap. So I will share. In fact, Ian, you've got the link. If you could maybe share in the chat the roadmap, because that would mean that people that want to follow along can, but I didn't want to put it all up on the slide. So yes, all of this is written down. All of this is in the roadmap itself. I'm just trying to provide highlights and excite people's interest. There you go, Ian's put it in. So on the 3rd mission around infrastructure, as I said, the main focus there is on fibre. Some areas of the region have really got their act together and are actually right up the Ofcom league tables on fibre rollout. So Coventry in particular and Wolverhampton have recently taken some steps. I know Birmingham have to speed up rollout, but other areas of the region are really struggling. We've had some discussions about various interventions we could make underneath a regional digital infrastructure board. Part of that is around how we can leverage work we're already doing on highways and on transport infrastructure to introduce what we're calling a dig once policy. So Greater Manchester, TfL have done some good work on every time they are digging up a road, how do they lay fibre? So there's work that we can do to better coordinate with utilities companies and particularly BT, Openreach and Virgin to do that. But really that mission around infrastructure is how do we accelerate fibre rollout, but also look ahead to 6G and future connectivity technologies to maintain our advantage. And a lot of that is led by and coordinated by West Midlands 5G and the team there. So those are the three horizontal missions around access, data, and infrastructure. And then we've also got really the last two are the vertical, so where those things might apply. So mission 4 is around the digital economy. And we've broken that down into 3 sections, really. So within the digital economy, 1 is around the dissemination of basic digital technologies, particularly among low productivity firms. So a lot of the work by Andy Haldane at the Bank of England, Be the Business, and work by McKinsey have flagged that one of the big drivers of the productivity gap in this country is the adoption of really basic digital technologies, things like enterprise resource management software, as opposed to using, either Excel or pen and paper, frankly. And there's a lot of good practice about how you can support small and medium enterprises in adopting those technologies. Be the Business in particular, supported by the UK Productivity Council, have done a lot of good work there. So the first part is, how can we work with partners to try and accelerate some of that adoption? The second is around the adoption of frontier technologies by those firms that are looking to scale up and grow. And that's working with organizations like the Digital Catapult on the big technologies they've identified as the next frontier. So whether that's distributed informational systems like blockchain, things like VR and AR, next generation connectivity, so 5G, etc., and other technologies. So how can we ensure, and we've got some of the good practice on that already. So the Spring program, one run by West Midlands 5G, Birmingham Tech's accelerator that Yanis and his team are launching, and a range of other initiatives that are part of the West Midlands Innovation Programme and are supported by some of the funding there. So the second is frontier technologies. And the third is around specifically our tech and digital economy, so those firms that would identify as primarily being tech and digital, and how we can support them to scale up and grow. And that is about access to investment, but it's also about the right supportive ecosystem, so they don't feel that they need to either move to another part of the country. Often we lose these firms to London, to Manchester, to Bristol, or even internationally. So that's about how we can support scale-up programs put forward by LEPs and others to make sure that there's a really credible and joined-up offer to those firms working in the digital and tech space. So in the digital economy, those are the 3 areas, and it's really important to say that in those areas, the CA plays a convening role, but actually the key actors there are going to be the local enterprise partnerships, the universities, further education colleges, and indeed a lot of the intermediary bodies working with clusters in that digital and tech sector, and more broadly in the business support ecosystem in the region. The 5th mission then, and I'm aware I'm really galloping through this, but I'm more than happy to dive into specific pieces or to have follow-up conversations. So the 5th area then is around digital public services and how we use digital to build a fairer, greener and healthier economy. A lot of that is led by Ed Cox, who's our Director of Public Service Reform and Inclusive Growth at the Combined Authority. And that has 3 areas that we've identified as a priority. So one is around net zero, how we can use digital to accelerate progress on meeting our net zero target of 2041. That's around the role of digital in the circular economy and sharing platforms, things like the role of digital in transport, encouraging active travel, moving people away from cars and carbon emitting modes of transport. And we've got some actions that are in the roadmap about how we might do that. Second area in that 5th mission around digital public services on health inequalities. So that's where the public health system and NHS partners are absolutely key. And again, the CA plays a convening role there, but it's for other organizations to really be in the lead, and we're about helping people to join up where that's useful. And that builds on our recent Health of the Region report, which highlights some of the inequalities that have been exacerbated by COVID, both by age, by geography, by gender, by ethnicity. And the 3rd area in that digital public services mission is around vulnerable adults and individuals with multiple and complex needs, recognizing that in the move to digital by default, using the insights from things like human-centered design, service design, and then the agile delivery that sits behind that, we can make better services for those individuals that often interact most with the state because they've got a range of needs from a range of organizations or parts of local government and central government. So that area around multiple and complex needs, we're working really closely with Directors of Adult Social Services and local authorities and other partners. So that's a probably a bit of a whirlwind through what is a pretty expansive document. The really important thing to say is we deliberately describe this as a roadmap, because this is not us saying, here are all the things we are going to do. This is us playing back. Here is what we've heard from partners are the real areas of focus for us as a region. And admittedly, within those 5 missions, there is an enormous amount of activity. And there'll be different groups that will take on those different pieces of work. So in terms of governance, what we've really tried to recognize as a core principle is that there'll be different delivery bodies or different forums leading different parts of that roadmap, and we should let them move at their own pace. But the key is coordination. And actually, Tech UK released a report after a series of roundtables in the West Midlands at the end of last year. And one of their key recommendations, and a phrase we've borrowed, was that the need for greater local digital capital. So they said we need to be talking about the relationships between these different pieces, because in the development of the roadmap, I think there's a really strong argument that any one of those 5 missions underpins the other 4. So you absolutely can't talk about low productivity in our digital economy without talking about digital exclusion in terms of people in poverty, about low connectivity and poor infrastructure, about a lack of data, about how we can best support those businesses, and about the public services that businesses rely on to have healthy and successful employees. So I think in all of those areas, these things are interrelated. That means that we're just establishing a very light touch digital roadmap steering group. That's going to be a small body that just tries to make sure that all these various areas are talking to one another. And the other thing we're doing that we've unashamedly stolen from the Smart London team is having a simple Trello board that outlines all the things we said we do, who's leading on those things, and what the actions are in those areas. And I'll share, in the spirit of kind of sharing things while they're a work in progress, in the chat, the draft Trello board, which outlines all the actions that are in the roadmap. There's complete read across, so there's nothing new in that Trello board. Who's the relevant lead on that project, and what the key milestones are. Because then if you have an interest in one of those actions, you can get in touch with me or one of the team and say, I think me, my organization, another partner has real value to add here, and so we'd like to work with you on it. But our approach very much is we're doing this to kind of send up a flare to say there are lots of partners regionally that think that digital is going to be absolutely crucial to our post-COVID recovery and to the success of this region, and government, private sector should really take notice that we're ready to engage in conversations about how we can do that. So I will pause there, because I think I've probably talked to you now for about 15 minutes, and very happy to either pick up any questions that I haven't in the chat, or to dive into discussion. But thanks for your time, and I'm really keen to work with this forum on the roadmap moving forward.
Yeah, so I'll just, I think we'll pick up some of the questions, Adam, as we go. Just to give you a sense, clearly this for me is something of major importance, a really fantastic scale of work that Adam's delivered here. I think the idea that digital is not a destination, it's not a destination anymore, but an enabler is key, is a core component of this, and the coalition of stakeholders who are going to do 3 things: coordinate, convene, and catalyze opportunities through the Trello and through the engagement, I think is also a new thing that's happening across the region. So I think Adam's done a really good job of explaining that a lot of this is picking up stuff we've already done and is working, but the focus on the challenges which just remain embedded. You know, Birmingham's, as you know, or the region as having the largest skills gap hasn't moved for many, many years. I know lots of people have tried to do that. So having this coalition really championing the change, I think, is super important. So I remain embedded in the guts of some of these things in terms of just trying to work out and catalyze and coordinate at the level, you know, on the ground as everybody else is doing. But having this kind of strategic roadmap, I think, is going to be key. So I'm just going to pick out some of the questions and just fire them out. I suppose, Adam, you can do the same. I'm just looking in the chat, sorry. So yeah, so I picked out this one because I think I thought it was quite pertinent. Somebody, Vicky, I think it was, interested in rural. So is there a strand within the route map that looks at this in more detail? And I think the fact that everything seems to be city-based, and I think is actually one of the reasons why things become entrenched. So Adam, any views on that?
So I'll be really candid, there isn't a lot of language in there about rural areas, only partly because really within the 7 Mets that the kind of combined authority have core responsibility for, the only areas of kind of semi-rurality sit in Solihull, and there are absolutely specific challenges related to connectivity in that part of the patch. However, I think we recognise that in terms of non-constituents of the combined authority and also the 3 LEP area, that rural connectivity is key, particularly if businesses have employees that are in rural areas. That's central to the success of West Midlands based businesses. So within all the missions, I'm really open to challenge on, well, actually this is going to look different for rural areas and it needs consideration. My hope would be that we've set it up in such a way that some of those rural challenges can be picked up. But Vicky, let's have a conversation offline, and if there are some areas, whether it's in connectivity or in the economy, where there needs to be a rural angle or a rural voice in that 3 LEP geography, very open to making adjustments and adding information in.
Yeah, okay. I think that's, I do think, and as I said, I'm embedded in certainly in the public service area around net zero, and we have described very different models, coordinated and integrated, but different models for a city or non-rural base to a rural solution. They do need to be coordinated, but there does need to be it's not the same one size fits all. It definitely has to be another one. So I think that's right. David Kidney, is public health a partner? I think you've outlined this because it's one of the strands, but relevant to health, behaviour change and prevention, I thought was really interesting. So the scope of that partnership, health, behaviour change and prevention. Adam?
Yes, absolutely is the short answer. So health have been involved in both the data piece as a key partner there, because that public health data is going to be really important in the net zero piece. And actually, I think we've I believe now awarded a tender on a piece around behaviour change in the environment linked to the Commonwealth Games. So David, I'll make sure you're looped into the work we're doing there, because it's being led by our head of wellbeing and prevention. So yes, essentially public health and health overall have been a really key partner. I should also mention that the NHS have been key in the digital inclusion piece too, because they're one of the key organisations that interact with people that are digitally excluded and can support them in getting online. So they've been engaged in a number of different projects. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that answers that. The one from Malcolm Harbour, Tech UK report recommended the launch of local innovation challenges. I think you've talked about some of the challenges and highlighted it in the some of the infrastructure pieces around Frontier. But anything expanding on that Tech UK? Have you used that as a kind of backdrop?
So 3 quick things on that. So one is we're just about to launch, and it's not tech specific, but we're just about to launch an innovation challenge around community recovery. So we've done a process around community recovery in the West Mids, led by local authorities in our recovery coordination group, and started actually by a citizens panel. So we had a lengthy process of engagement with randomly selected members of the public, deliberated online, the first kind of combined authority to do that as part of COVID recovery. And we're now launching an innovation challenge, which has got some financial prizes and they're relatively small, but I think significant enough to stoke interest. Financial prizes, opportunities to develop business cases and proposals, and then a final judging panel. I think information's coming out on that in the next week or 2, but that's led around community recovery. So there'll absolutely be a digital tech role for that. Now, it's not of the scale in which you're going to get some of the really big players, but I hope there are some real digital and tech areas there. Second, we've had a really good conversation with the Connected Places Catapult about some of the work they're doing nationally on civic innovation, and actually have shared supportive language around their proposal for a national civic innovation platform to join up policymakers, people that could possibly provide solutions, and then think tanks and policy shapers. So that's in its very early stages, but it might be we can leverage the catapults on some of that work. And the final thing around the challenges, and I know this is slightly different, but in our work with Birmingham Tech, and we're announcing this shortly, but we've been supporting, we are going to support some of the firms on their accelerator, specifically around climate change and net zero. So what we want to do is link up climate tech firms, or even firms that are working on technology to reduce waste. So if it's an app that reduces waste through sharing or whatever it might be. So we're going to link them with our WM 2041 team to make sure there's a real read across between technology and digital solutions and their public applications. So that's not a challenge in the sense that there's a distinct problem statement, but it has a similar effect in as much as it hopefully stimulates innovation through our sponsorship of that program. But yeah, I think that is something we need to look more into in the future. The question will be which organizations are best placed to do it on which topics, right? Because I think very often LEPs are going to be in a much stronger position to issue some of those challenges, and the CA about amplifying, supporting and promoting.
Yeah, so a good spread there actually. So I think it's broader than the Tech UK report suggested, which I like. I think this idea of a civic, a national civic platform as well, where you kind of get this civic engagement and everything you've done there, I think it bodes well. Obviously, all of this is about what happens in that theory of change towards impact at scale. So final question here, I think. I might have time for one more. Who's this from? Devon Geary. How did you begin by developing relevant third sector partners across the region? And does this categorization exclude universities? I think you mentioned universities as one of the partners, but the third sector partnerships, what was your approach there, Adam?
To partnerships, third sector partnerships.
Yeah, the third sector partners. So it's specifically about those third sector, voluntary, charity, social enterprise sector partners, rather than public service or LEP type or government types or corporates. Or did you have a specific focus?
Yeah, so we did that in a few ways. So we had an external advisory group we set up early on to make sure that we had a range of different opinions around the room, and there were a number of different third sector organisations represented on that, both national and local. To make sure we got a bit of feedback. So organisations nationally, like the Good Things Foundation, the Ada Lovelace Institute, that do work on data and AI ethics, and then more locally some cultural organisations. So Karen Newman from Birmingham Open Media, Indy Diol from Desi Blitz, the online publication. So at that point we engaged. I think we also tried to make sure that we had, in the workshops we held early on, a range of different organisations. And I noticed the question mentions universities, so we kind of include them as a kind of quasi-public third sector, but the universities have been involved throughout, actually at multiple different levels. So I'm trying to think, I think all 6 universities, at least 2 people from each were involved at different stages in different workshops, because they all have various expertise on some of these topics. So, for example, Prashant Pilar, University of Wolverhampton on cybersecurity, Kerry Kerwin at Warwick on circular economy, and others. So we've engaged in that way. I do think actually a bit of a gap at the moment is really understanding the breadth of third sector and voluntary organisations that are in the region. We're currently using a lot of intermediary organisations to get to those, so using the voluntary, the VCS organisations and representative organisations. But actually, we need to get better at, particularly through the Digital Inclusion Coalition, engaging with frontline voluntary sector organisations to understand what they're working on and how we can support them. So if there are either, kind of collections of those groups we should be chatting to, or individual organisations, community interest companies that were flagged are a good starting point, then very happy to engage. And I'm getting, lots of people are sending me direct messages. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Please email me. I'm very, very happy to talk about any of this.
Yeah, you're going to get inundated, Adam. So
that's great. That was the whole point of this, right? Was to say let's do some of this together. So yeah, I'll drop my email. Very, very happy to chat to anyone who'd like to.
All right, I'm just going to pull out one more, just to mention as well for the voluntary organisations, a couple of partners you might want to, who I'm speaking to in various guises. Obviously, the legacy folk for Commonwealth Games, so Nicola Turner, and also the Community Fund, who are doing something around different challenges for community organisations. So clearly they host a lot of the relationships. So a conversation with them, Adam, might be the 2 of them, either separately or together, could be helpful, because they actually are talking to organisations on the ground about how they can support. Last question for definite. Liz McArdle, are you doing work to link between the basic digital technology supported by the business and the frontier technologies in manufacturing as there could be opportunities for both within a single company? So this is a manufacturing specific around frontier and digital tech.
Yeah, and it was a point that was, I think, well made in some of our workshops, Liz, both in the chat we had and in with Sarah, that this is a spectrum, right? Not two distinct sets of organizations that might need a basic digital technology or a frontier one. And actually, there's a real opportunity to leapfrog. So if you can work with an organization and really explain, well, understand their business model and explain how they can adopt a frontier technology as opposed to moving through various iterations, then you can have massive productivity improvements. But the really important thing to say is that business support isn't for the CA to deliver. It's got to be, and all the evidence seems to indicate that that's most successful when it's delivered by people that really understand and are embedded in either the sector or subsector that they're supporting. And that's by the growth hubs, that's delivered by the LEPs. And our role there in that space is to try and make sure that we're leveraging partnerships with people like Be the Business, Digital Catapult, others to support that activity. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Liz. It's a continuum, not two discrete groups, but it might be there are different partners we work with to leverage their expertise.